The Bible is full of well-known stories: Noah building the ark, Moses parting the Red Sea, Jesus feeding the multitude with loaves and fishes. But amidst these famous tales are darker stories. Stories of murder, brutality, and bloodshed that are often overlooked. In this video, we'll explore 5 lesser-known murders recorded in the pages of the Bible. As we journey back to these ancient times, we'll see how even these dark deeds ultimately point to greater truths about human nature, justice, and God's sovereignty overall. Let's dive in. Our first stop is the book of Genesis, chapter 4. Here we meet the world's first brothers, Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam and Eve. Cain was a farmer, coaxing crops from the earth, while Abel was a shepherd, tending to flocks in the fields. When the time came to present offerings to the Lord, Abel brought the best portions from his flock, while Cain brought mere fruits of the soil. God looked with favor on Abel's offering, but not Cain's. Jealousy began to simmer in Cain's heart, slowly building to a boil. The Lord warned Cain to master this sinful anger welling within him, but Cain let the bitterness take root. One day, he lured Abel out to the fields and violently murdered him, spilling the first human blood upon the earth. When God inquired about Abel's whereabouts, Cain replied with the infamous line, "Am I my brother's keeper?" But the blood of Abel cried out from the ground, and Cain was cursed to be a restless wanderer of the earth. From this tragedy, we see how unchecked envy and anger can lead us to unspeakable acts. Cain allowed resentment toward his brother to fester until it drove him to murder. And yet, God did not immediately strike Cain dead, but extended mercy, sparing his life. In the same way, God's justice is often tempered with astounding grace toward even the worst of sinners. Flipping forward to Judges chapter 4, we find the Israelites once again oppressed by foreign powers as punishment for their unfaithfulness. For 20 years, the Canaanite king Jabin cruelly subjugated them with commanders like the ruthless Sisera, captain of Jabin's army. But God would raise up an unlikely heroine to deliver his people, a housewife named Jael. When Sisera fled on foot after his armies were routed by the Israelites, he stopped to rest at the tent of Jael and her husband Heber. Seeing Sisera's vulnerability, Jael welcomed him into the tent and covered him with a blanket as he lay down to sleep, exhausted from battle. But as Sisera drifted off, Jael quietly grabbed a tent peg and hammer. With a swift, forceful blow, she drove the peg through Sisera's temple, nailing him to the ground and instantly killing him. While this may seem a shockingly brutal act for a woman in that culture, it was a strategic strike that helped secure Israel's victory and freedom. Jael used what she had on hand, everyday tent pegs, to defeat an enemy of God's people. It shows that the Lord often works through unlikely individuals to accomplish his purposes. Jael's tent became the unlikely scene of deliverance. Not all murder in the Bible involves human perpetrators. 2 Kings records the strange case of a mob of juvenile delinquents and some ferocious bears. The prophet Elisha was traveling to Bethel shortly after his mentor Elijah had been taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. Along the way, a gang of youths, more than 42 of them, began mocking and insulting Elisha, jeering at him to go on up like Elijah. Elisha turned and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Suddenly, 2 female bears charged out of the woods and mauled 42 of the youths. This frightening scene was a dramatic judgment on those who dared to insult God's prophet and mock his power. The grisly fate of these reckless youths reminds us that God's words and messengers are not to be trifled with. It also affirms the authority God had bestowed on Elisha to continue Elijah's prophetic work. Even the book of Psalms, known for beautiful poetry praising God, contains a strange murder. Psalm 109 is categorized as an imprecatory prayer in which the psalmist David calls down curses and judgment on his enemies. The language is shockingly graphic. May his children be fatherless and his wife a widow. May his children wander about and beg, seeking food far from the ruins they inhabit. But the most brutal line comes in verse 8. May his days be few, may another take his office. This is actually a call for his enemy to be murdered so that someone else can take his position. David minces no words in asking God to bring death and disaster on his foes. While Jesus later instructed us to love and pray for our enemies, these imprecatory psalms reveal the honest cries of David's heart and show that we can bring our rawest emotions to God. They also point to God as the ultimate judge to whom we must entrust justice. Finally, let's examine a murder mystery from the life of King David, recorded in 2 Samuel. After David's affair with Bathsheba and murder of her husband Uriah, their illegitimate child fell ill. David fasted and prayed fervently for the child's life, but after 7 days, the baby died. When David heard the news, he cleaned himself up, worshipped God, and ate a meal, puzzling his servants. They asked why he wept while the child was alive, but moved on once the child was dead. David replied, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, 'Who knows whether the Lord will be gracious to me that the child may live?' But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will not return to me." Psalm 12:22-23. Even in the midst of his sin's tragic consequences, David entrusted the situation to God's sovereignty. He accepted that he could not reverse what had happened, but took comfort knowing that one day he would be reunited with his child. The loss of David's son reminds us that even forgiven sin often carries painful repercussions. Yet David's faith in God's grace and the afterlife gives us hope. Through Christ, we can experience restoration with God and the assurance of eternal life, when God will wipe every tear from our eyes and there will be no more death, mourning, crying, or pain. These 5 Bible murders we've examined, from Cain and Abel to David's infant son, display the depths of human depravity and the consequences of sin. Yet they also point us to a just God who judges evil, extends mercy to repentant sinners, works all things according to his sovereign plan, and will one day make all things right. In this, we can find a strange comfort and hope even in the darkest of biblical narratives.